There has been a terrible fire overnight. It's in Breezy Point, and perhaps visitors to New York can actually pass that area when they're driving in from JFK. There were 80 homes that were burned, many of them to the ground because of a fire that was whipped by winds from house to house. New York State Assembly member Philip Goldfeder represents that area and represents that district. He joins us right now. He says almost his entire area is underwater. Representative, thank you very much for joining us, Assemblyman.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We are talking about your area. The whole world is watching and focused on this incredible storm. Tell me what the state of the situation is there right now.
We keep hearing the word devastation used, and you and I have used it before, probably many a time. But until you've experienced it, it really doesn't take meaning until you truly understand and appreciate what's going on. Rockaway is a peninsula surrounded on one side by the ocean and one side by the bay. There's 130,000 people who I would venture to say almost all of them, if not all of them, were at some point underwater. Their homes were damaged, were completely underwater. And specifically in Breezy Point, either your home was underwater or your home was on fire. I mean, this is the circumstances that presented themselves last night were unlike anybody in this neighborhood has ever seen before.
That is unbelievable to hear you say that. 130,000 people either underwater or on fire. How did that happen to those 80 houses? Do we know yet how the fire started?
It's looking like it was the power lines that came down due to the flooding and the heavy winds. And as anybody would tell you, as they teach us in first grade, when there are heavy winds and fire, it only leads to bad things. What makes our neighborhood so unique is the houses, and especially in Breezy Point, there are many wood frame houses, and they're very close together. So with high winds, a small fire can turn into, it started out yesterday at 20, 30, and we're hearing today 80 or 90 homes completely burned to the ground in Breezy Point. And that's in addition to, fires in El Harbor and Rockaway Park and in other areas of the peninsula. So we're really seeing devastation at its worst.
Can you tell me what's happened to those people? Were they not in their homes? And even if they weren't there and escaped injury, what will happen to them? Are they being housed by the authorities?
There are shelters that are being set up. There are many shelters throughout New York City. There was an evacuation order in place, but there's one of those things that make Rockaway residents so special is that we're stubborn. And sometimes we don't heed the call when we should. In addition to the evacuations that took place last year during Hurricane Irene, and as you remember, Hurricane Irene never really presented what everybody thought it would. So everybody said, well, we stayed last year, we could stay again this year. And obviously that proved to be the wrong attitude. And we're unknown, and that's why, people keep asking me, well, how much do you think it's going to cost to rebuild and to get us back to where we need to be? And I don't even think we're up to that yet. I mean, we are still in recovery and rescue mode. I think there are a lot of people who are still trapped and underwater. We have a lot of work to do before we can start thinking about how to get ourselves back together, and that's what I intend to do.
So, Assemblyman, are you still saying that there are people who are unaccounted for?
I couldn't tell you, in parts of southern Queens, they've already started going door to door. In Rockaway, we have not yet started going door to door, or we have not yet. So we just don't know who is in, who is out. I mean, it's just something about 130. Exactly.
Assemblymember Goldfeder, thank you so much indeed for joining us from Breezy Point, and we obviously wish you good luck with your district there. It looks really devastating. And we are now going to turn to Lieutenant General Russell Honore, retired. He was, in 2005, chosen by President George W. Bush to command the Joint Task Force taking care of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. He coordinated the military relief efforts there. Lieutenant General, thank you very much for joining me.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You were there, you saw what was then the worst hurricane that had hit the United States, and we all remember so well what happened after Katrina. What are your initial thoughts about this one? How does that stack up?
Well, I think many of the lessons that the government learned was applied to this big storm as a team as it approached the early evacuation of the vulnerable population, Since Katrina, I've gone to Con Ed, the power company in New York, twice. They've had seminars with local leaders talking about the scenario. I briefed them on lessons learned from Katrina with the borough chiefs and with the fire chiefs throughout the New York City area. So I think the application of what happened in Katrina, not to let it happen again, many positive things happen in terms of evacuation. The other thing is prepositioning the National Guard from all the states, and the presidential declaration that occurred made a big difference. Now we have over 7,000 National Guard on duty, helping to rescue people along with the fire departments and the first responders. So I think a lot of positive has happened since then in the changes that were made, and Administrator Fugate of the FEMA leans forward, their preposition, Northern Command in charge of federal response, and Army North have prepositioned people to help the local, state, and governments to respond as needed with helicopters and with logistics.
So you're basically painting a picture of a successful pre-positioning and about as successful as possible of first response from federal, state, and local disaster agencies.
Yes, but we've got to keep in context that the reason this thing is a disaster is that it's overmatched the capacity of local governments to handle. So there will still be people that will be waiting to be rescued because of the complexity and to be able to find everyone. That's why we continue to encourage neighbors to check on neighbors until the response teams can get there, because the neighbors, helping neighbors, will save more lives initially than the response teams will, Sienna.
Well, that's really interesting because, as you know, many of the police and those emergency workers will tell people to keep away, will close down streets. We've seen that already. What is your advice to mayors, to local police?
To allow the people to move and go check on their relatives. Police and mayors get too concerned about security. They all want to pull their guns out. They need to put the damn guns away and allow people to go check on their relatives and friends because they know where they live. If they close the cities down, one of the most valuable assets we got, the population, which saves more lives after disaster, will not be able to get in there and help their relatives and friends.
Well, you sound very emphatic on that. So what you're saying now is a citizens kind of army is required of concerned relatives to go in and do what they know best, to pluck their relatives out.
I'm admitting to you, neighbors saved more people's lives in Katrina than the Army ever did. Government isn't good enough to do this. We have to have citizens moving and checking on each other and go and check on their relatives. They cannot close this down because of security. They need to allow people to go check on their friends and to check on their neighbors.
And I remember Katrina, it was obviously during a very warm time. It was early September. We're now heading into cold weather. We've seen areas which even have snow, and it's chilly out there. What is the danger for those who are still out there and unaccounted for?
It's going to be hypothermia. Because this temperature, they may get wet, they get overexposed to these cool temperatures, and this wind that continues. And again, help is on the way, but what's going to help people now is those who are listening that may have a weather radio, is the neighbors help neighbors until people can be evacuated. The other thing is, how do we prepare these communities, because all these homes have been destroyed, and where people are going to live. So again, we've talked strategy tactics for 2 days now. The mayors have. Now the heavy lifting comes with logistics, because this is a logistics operation now, Sienna.
Do you think that the logistics operation, which has sort of gone into effect already, is going to get, I mean, what's going to happen? We're talking, you know, we're down 12 or more hours after the worst of it. Is it going to uncover worse, or is it going to get easier to deal with as the time goes on?
It's going to get worse before it gets better, because the enormous amount of population that we're dealing with that's sheltered in place, that can look forward to 3 to 5 days to 10 days without electricity. This will get worse before it gets better. Right now, the evacuation people where the flooding occurred, put out. And once that's done, then how do you get people out that have medical issues that can't live where they're living because they don't have electricity? Or how do you get enough shelters open? And this will get worse, I think, before it gets better.
And what about people who have no batteries, who have no phones, who don't have cable television, who simply don't have any means of communicating or knowing what's going on outside around them?
That is where the neighbor concept comes into play. You know, the neighbors have to help neighbors, and they have to get out of their house if they're listening and find their neighbors and find somebody near them that they can communicate with.
Lieutenant General, thank you so much indeed for joining us. I appreciate your insight.
And good luck to the people.
Thank you. New Yorkers see themselves, of course, as survivors, but as the storm raged last night, something very dear to the people of this city was imperiled: their ability to laugh at themselves. Jon Stewart, whose political humor is more trusted than most politicians and who is an international phenomenon, had to cancel his live daily show and replace it with a rerun. But for New York late-night comics David Letterman and Jimmy Fallon, the show went on, sort of.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, and we have no studio audience. Welcome to Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, everybody. Please keep it down.
So empty studios, but certainly those comedians knowing that people did need some kind of light relief after what happened yesterday. New Yorkers may have lost power and other essentials, but not their sense of humor. We will be right back.
Bringing you award